this SUV pulls up, and bad guy gets out of the vehicle and is pointing a gun in the face of my neighbor's guest.
Hey gang, if you're listening to this right now, odds are you watch videos on the main channel and you've seen how important speed and accuracy are in a gunfight. That's why Active Self-Protection recommends the Range Tech Shot Timer. It's the lowest cost shot timer on the market that we're aware of, Bluetooth compatible with any Android or iOS device, more features than any other shot timer. You can store all your data on the cloud for free, native integration with Practice Score, and a visual light-based go signal. Visit them at rangetechtimer.com, rangetechtimer.com, and tell them your friends at the Active Self-Protection Podcast sent you. All right, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver, your favorite, you're saying in your head right now, former Fed. Welcome back to the show. With us this week, a new friend of mine named Gabriel. Blair, he hails from the great state of Texas. He's married with 4 kids and one on the way, which is exciting. And he is a remote project manager in information technology. Gabriel, man, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, he and I just had a few technical difficulties. As the first time I've had that many technical difficulties, turns out it was my fault. I should have predicted that coming. Being a former Fed, we're not good for much. So if it was going to get messed up, it would be me that.
Well, you had me thinking it was me for a minute there.
Yeah, I thought it was you. I never had that problem. Anyway, tell us about you and where you grew up. Are you from Texas originally, and if so, what part?
Yeah, from the southern half of Texas.
Okay.
North of Harris County. Grew up in Harris County, but had to get out of there at a certain point. My parents decided it was just a little too risky, too much going on. Couldn't wear my sneakers outside, so moved out towards the country. And yeah, I mean, I've visited 7 countries as a missionary in my 20s, and kind of got to see the world and appreciate what we have here in the United States. Kind of got started late as far as family goes, but really excited to have our 5th on the way and stop, I think. Yeah.
So you were a missionary. That's really cool. Can you talk to us about that? What are some of the countries you went to?
I went to Romania in 1998 and Bulgaria. Still could tell that the fall of the Soviet Union was still heavily impacting that area of the world. And I went to Kenya in 1999, India in 2000, Mexico in 2001, Thailand in 2003, and Turkey in 2004-ish. I don't know. It's been 20 years, so now
people talk about this or that thing being a calling. Acting is my calling, or law enforcement. There is no truer calling than missionary work. It is literally a call. Like my wife, our church a few years back, we had our missionary folks from Uganda and Kenya from an orphanage come in and talk. And my wife doesn't like to go to the motor vehicle department by herself. Never mind Africa. But as soon as they got done talking, she turns to me. She goes, "Oh no." I said, "What?" She said, I think I have to go to Africa. And it just absolutely freaked me out. And she resisted it for about a month, and God just weared her down until she gave in and went, and had a heck of an experience out there. So good on you for listening to God and doing what He asked you to do. It really is quite something.
Yeah, it's it's a different experience, and there was people that were just grateful to have any kind of help we could offer. And we dug a well in Thailand. That was where I spent the most time, was 2 months, and they lived very simple lives. When the rice paddies needed the water, they didn't have running water in their house. I mean, and this was in 03-ish, so it was eye-opening, experience. Washer and dryer was just unheard of in most of the places that we went to. So we can definitely be thankful for all of the creature comforts that we have here even still.
I've been a few places in the world, and some of them nice, some of them not so nice, and it doesn't matter where I'm coming back from. I'm always glad to be back here when I'm back here, regardless if I'm coming from Managua or London. I'm like, okay, this is where, I need to spend most of my time. I know that I know enough about your incident to know that it involved the defensive use of a firearm. So tell us about your level of training. What sort of firearms training had you had prior to the incident?
Well, around 2008, I took a self-defense class, like a weekend thing, and actually had the guy come over to our house afterwards. Just kind of paid him for a visit to assess our the home that my former spouse and I had at the time, and got some really good tips, in increasing home security with longer screws and where to hold up, and got some good information there. I didn't purchase a firearm at the time, but when the pandemic hit, decided to go ahead and get a weapon. So the first gun I owned was in 2020, and took it to a range and fired it. But it was my father-in-law affectionately referred to it as a boat anchor, the Taurus judge. Not really here nor there. It doesn't know what it is, and so he generously traded me an EMP4 1911 Springfield for that boat anchor, which is I mean it's a good truck gun, but not a great home defense gun if it's your only weapon. Which the Springfield had a higher capacity, and so roundabout maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I ran into the Active Self Protection YouTube channel and started watching and learning. I would say that it was definitely helpful to have additional information in my head when things went down in my personal life, because at the very least I had some additional knowledge. I've never been in the military. I've never been in law enforcement. So, I've always been a private citizen or a homemaker, of a father, not, not at all experienced in. So this was all a first for me.
For those of our audience who don't know what a Taurus judge is, I know what it is. Could you explain it to them for me? Because it's definitely an unusual
Oh,
style of handgun.
yeah. I mean, I wanted a revolver at first, and I don't think it was a bad choice necessarily, but as I got more into guns and realized what would be helpful to have, a magazine loaded weapon is I think superior in a lot of instances if you know how to use it. But I like the Taurus Judge because it also fired 410A, and I was concerned about ammo shortages, and so I couldn't find very many 45 caliber rounds in our area. So I bought what I could, and then I bought a bunch of 410A, which that gun would also shoot. So that was part of my reasoning for it. But it weighs, a ton. You could bludgeon someone with it as easily as you could shoot them, I think. Um, and so, as far as, concealed carry or even carrying around your property, it just wasn't a good fit. And so, I was able to trade it for a much better weapon, and actually decided to purchase a similar gun, a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield Easy 9 millimeter, which is a little more carryable around my property and different places where I'm allowed to carry.
In Texas, I know they recently passed. I'm not sure what they call it there. They call it constitutional carry or permitless
Hmm.
carry. So, do you avail yourself of that? If you don't mind, you don't have to answer that question if you don't want to give away too much. But do you carry with you now concealed out in public or no?
After this experience, I do. Everywhere that I'm allowed to, I carry, and I keep a safe in my vehicle if I'm going to a place where I'm not allowed to carry, that's lockable, and it latches around the supports of the seat. Because yeah, this experience changed a lot. For me, just realizing that trouble can find you even if you're not looking for it. I see a lot of people open carry, and I think it's a terrible idea. I'm never going to be one that's just going to have a gun on my hip. But I do carry a lot.
For those who don't know, I assume most of our listeners know what the difference is, but open carry just means there's a lot of states where you can carry a gun without a permit as long as it's not concealed. And some people open carry even when they don't have to open carry. Open carry just meaning that the gun or most of the gun is out and visible to the general public. I don't love the idea. I'm not going to bag anybody who open carries. That's your business. But please, if you do, please, for the love of all that is holy, please get a retention, not a Serpa, get a retention holster that has to be defeated. Because what I hate to see is people at the Slurpee machine with their gun almost behind them in a non-retention holster, and someone could just take that gun like that.
Yeah.
I've seen it time and time again here in Arizona, and it's suboptimal. So if you must open carry, please get a retention holster.
If a bad guy is going to do something nefarious, then it makes you more of a target if you're open carrying.
Agreed.
If you're concealed carrying, then you have a chance to counter ambush at your preferred moment.
Right.
But if you're open carrying, then bad guy's probably going to shoot first.
Well, he's
Um,
going to shoot you first. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's that's why I choose to conceal carry at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, and again with the open carry, the problem isn't so much just that you get your gun taken away and hurt, but everyone around
Mm-hmm.
you is now at risk of whoever decides to grab that gun and do whatever. Not that this happens all the time. I understand that. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why you would run the risk of having your gun taken away or being the first one shot when you have all the ability to legally concealed carry, especially in places like Arizona and in Texas. So, Gabriel, let's talk about the event, your critical incident. Tell us about when did this happen and where were you and what happened in your own words. Take your time.
Okay. So we're at home on New Year's Eve, and just gonna set some fireworks off, for the kids, a few small ones that I had picked up, and went outside around about 10:15. Um, got some chairs set up by the street, and my neighbor came out with his family about the same time, and we're friendly with each other. And usually our heaviest interaction is around 4th of July or New Year's, where we'll shoot off fireworks together.
Makes sense.
And he'll do some and I'll do some, and the kids love it. Um, Around about 10:20, a vehicle approached fast down the street, didn't stop at the stop sign. There was an unkind interaction as everyone kind of had to quickly move out of the street. And my neighbor, let the guy know that that wasn't okay. Um, Not in the nicest of terms.
Well, he almost ran you
And
over.
yeah, exactly. I
So
mean,
yeah,
he was definitely going 35, 40 miles an hour down the street and then stopped fast in front of my neighbor's driveway, which my neighbor's driveway and mine are exactly opposite of each other almost. Um, and so because we live on a corner lot, and so does he. So the guy stops, and there's this unkind interaction. I didn't get to hear everything that was said, but the perp ends up flashing a gun at my neighbor, and he runs back up to the porch. He flashed a gun at me. He flashed a gun at me. I tell my wife and kids, hey, let's move towards the inside, because he drives away, the perp. But I figure it'll probably take him about 2 minutes to get around the block, so we want to be inside.
do you know this
Uh,
person?
don't know the perp, had never seen him before.
Okay,
And my neighbor said that when he flashed the gun, he said, do you want to die today? Because their interaction was unkind up to that point. And I think that an ounce of kindness will go a long way to diffuse a situation. No, he shouldn't have been racing down the street, but if kinder words were spoken, hey sir, could you please slow down, we got kids out here, then maybe it doesn't escalate from that point.
sure.
And the driver's side was on my neighbor's side of the street, so that's where the interaction took place. I probably wouldn't have said anything to him except for like, hey, slow down, maybe motioning my hands.
Hmm.
But nobody was really at risk of getting run over. It just freaked everyone out, so ruined our fun for the moment. So maybe about 10 minutes later, we're still inside, and my neighbor resumes fireworks. The police visit about 11 o'clock and take down a description, because we had called them just to let them know, hey, this is what happened. I realized that my forward facing camera is down, that the dog had chewed through it at this point. Um, in hindsight, I could have taken down one of my backyard cameras and gotten that forward facing camera up and running. But I really thought that the incident was over. The police had been called. We were just going to be a little bit cautious.
Hmm.
Something I would have done differently is I would have been carrying at that point, which I wasn't, out of, just I didn't want to print. We're just having fun on New Year's. But in rethinking it, that's something I probably would have done differently. I would have had a weapon on me just in case. there's not really much that the police are going to be able to do at that point, so they leave, and I decide to let the my kids watch the fireworks from the porch, which is about 50 yards offset from the street.
Hmm.
I stay out there with them for a little while, and decide to go in, check on the dogs, check on my wife and the two little ones that we've got that have gone back inside. It's getting late, and this SUV returns and allegedly fires 5 rounds at my neighbor's house or into the yard. And the boys, my older boys are 11 and 12, came inside and said, uh, Dad, that truck came back and we heard more fireworks, but they didn't sound the same.
Mm.
And I said, well, you did the right thing coming back inside. So we call 911 again. And, I take a look at my security cameras, and that truck had moved on. So I go talk with the neighbor, and he said, yeah, they just fired 5 rounds and then took off. Um, so unbeknownst to me, the police, they don't return at this point. No, no one's injured, and it's New Year's Eve, so they've got a lot going on, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah, but
uh,
somebody shooting at an occupied dwelling is still pretty serious. I would have liked to have seen them
yeah.
respond to that. But anyway, go ahead. What happened?
So unbeknownst to me, maybe about 20 minutes later, 10 minutes till midnight, um, my neighbor has a guest that is driving a van, and they go up towards the lake. Um, I don't know what was exchanged there, but it wasn't positive. Had I known about that, because I could only see it on my security footage later, had I known about that, I probably wouldn't have gone outside again.
Hmm.
But around 11:55, nothing else has gone down, and I tell my wife, "Hey, we need to walk the dogs because otherwise we're going to have an issue." But we'll stay close to our buildings, that and stay away from the street. And I'm carrying it at this point just in case. And I've got a flashlight, but in hindsight, not the greatest flashlight. I've since replaced it with a better one.
Okay.
So we're walking outside, and New Year's happens, and there's fireworks going, and the perp returns right about the time that we're about 30 feet from our back door. There's a big oak tree, and about 35 yards to my left, this SUV pulls up, and bad guy gets out of the vehicle and is pointing a gun in the face of my neighbor's guest, who probably didn't know what all was going on when he drove my neighbor up to the lake, and whatever interaction there was not positive. Um, so he's pointing a gun in my neighbor's guest's face, and I, as nonchalantly as I can, I tell the boys, "Hey guys, let's get behind this oak tree that's like 2 feet to our right
Hmm.
and about 8 feet in diameter, so it's big enough for offer some quick cover." And I pull my weapon out as quickly as I can, and I sight the bad guy, and I have to make a decision. Now, I believe in God, and I believe that we can listen for a still small voice to guide us in certain circumstances that are extremely challenging.
Hmm.
And the only thing I could tell you is that I felt and heard weight. And of course, a lot of information is racing through my head, stuff that I've picked up along the way. Watching active self protection has definitely helped. So I'm thinking about the backstop. I'm thinking about this isn't my fight necessarily. My priority is my family. And, I'm not 1,000% that I can hit this guy, and I don't want to engage him first. But I decide if he shoots this other man in cold blood, at that point I'm going to return fire because I don't know what else he's capable of. But it seems like posturing at this point, and he's mad and whatnot.
Let's walk back just a second. So earlier
Sure.
on in this exchange, your neighbor's guest, his visitor, drove
Hmm.
your neighbor up to the lake, and we suspect that there was some kind of confrontation, perhaps between whoever it
Yeah.
was in the SUV and your neighbor, because I was a little
I'm
confused
spe-
about that.
I'm speculating that that's the only reason that they would have gone that direction, and the reason why the bad guy came back a third time,
Okay,
and this
okay.
time with red in his eyes.
So now he's got
Um,
he's got your neighbor's guest at gunpoint.
at gunpoint. He's 2 feet away from him. So,
And your neighbor's guest
um,
clearly is not armed and not threatening him in any way, shape, or form. So he's just got a gun to this guy. You're about how far away again?
35 yards ish
And
behind an oak tree.
the
I've
kids are
got
with you.
him, and the kids are behind the tree
All
next
right.
to me.
Okay.
And I just tell them, get down, keep the dogs down. And, I had never pointed my weapon at a human being before. And the way that my son remembers it, my hand was shaking so much that he thought I fired.
Mm,
When he heard my neighbor come outside and fire at the bad guy, he thought that was me firing at the bad guy.
okay.
But I sighted him, but he hadn't noticed us. He was seeing red, and it wasn't in our direction,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully. Because up to this point, we hadn't had a single interaction with this person. This violence, this trouble just kind of came to our area. So my neighbor comes out, and some more words are exchanged, and um, my my auditory kind of shut off. I was tunnel visioned, and I can only loosely remember how many shots ended up being fired, but it was at least 10. And I believe that both individuals had revolvers, and they were around 5 to 6 shot revolvers. Um, and so once the shots started exchanging, the action quickly moved around towards the front of the house. So I moved them briefly from the cover of the oak tree, my boys, to behind our house, where we've got a water storage tank, 260 gallons that was full, and I figured, okay, that will help stop bullets, because I didn't like the angle that we were at, um, behind the oak tree. It wasn't as good a cover. Plus, we've got a brick house, so small arms is not going to penetrate typically, except for through windows. So all this is racing through my head, and then as the action moves towards the front of the house, and there's shots exchanging between the two parties, I decide to go get the boys from behind the house, and I move them inside, and because now I'm concerned about my wife and the two little ones that are 5 and 2. Um, and if they don't know what's going on, and a straight bullet goes through the front of the house through a window, then they could get injured. And my wife had asked our daughter, "What do you hear?" Because she's hearing impaired and could only pick up bits and pieces of what was going on. And our daughter said, "I hear yelling and fireworks." And it's after midnight, by a good 10 minutes now. So she tells her to get down on the ground, and down on the floor, and they move behind the couch. And by the time I got in, they were still huddled behind the couch. I send everybody behind the kitchen counter, because there's pots and pans and an oven and a little bit better cover. And I told my wife, "I'll be right back." In hindsight, I would have gotten a backup firearm and given it to her, and maybe explained that I'm not just going to run out there and make myself a target, if I can help it. But I had the thought, if you don't go out there, someone is going to die.
Mm-hmm.
If I only stayed inside and didn't insert myself into the situation when possible, that someone was going to die. Um, and so I got them all into cover, and I went back around to my garage behind the brick wall, and I just kind of waited for a good 20 seconds until I was sure that I didn't hear more shots ringing out. And I'm thinking, okay, I've placed two revolvers. It's going to take time to reload. I've got my Smith and Wesson M&P with two clips on my belt by this point, and so I'm anticipating that I'm likely the only person with a loaded weapon. So I move from cover after I hear shots stop firing, and try to evaluate the situation from behind a big magnolia tree that's in my yard. So it's another spot of cover and a good vantage point of where everything was going down. And what I see is kind of uh, just chaos, utter chaos. The bad guy's vehicle is now in a ditch. The bad guy's girlfriend is fighting with the neighbor's wife, and the bad guy's girlfriend is bleeding and losing this fight significantly. Um, and my neighbor is yelling, "There he is! Shoot him!" But
To you,
I
he's
don't
saying
see a.
this.
He's yelling at me because he sees that I have a gun,
Uh huh.
and he says, "There's the bad guy! Shoot him!" But I don't see the bad guy with the gun, and I'm looking for the weapon, but I don't see one,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm super amped at this point, and um, you know, thankfully I had enough uh, training or knowledge to understand that I shouldn't shoot an unarmed person,
Uh
even if
huh.
they were a violent threat 10 seconds ago. Um, what I believe happened is that the bad guy threw his gun into the woods across the street from us after he ran out of ammo. And it may have been around the time that he saw me emerge and was like, okay, bad idea to have an unloaded gun.
Mm-hmm.
It's no good to me anymore. And he pitched it. Um, and there was some different negative interactions as far as fist fighting and bludgeoning. And I'm not able to um, articulate all of that because my focus was on, okay, does this bad guy have a secondary weapon? I'm continuing to keep him in my sights
Sure.
in case he's got something else as a backup weapon. And at a certain point, I don't know if I thought it or I said it, but I said to my neighbor's wife, and I can't even remember if it was auditory, but she's had enough thinking about the bad guy's girlfriend
Uh huh.
because she's bleeding really bad at this point, and it's kind of just degraded into like vigilante justice. Um, so the bad guy doesn't have a mark on him. He never gets involved in any physical altercation. He gets close, but he kind of just feigns chivalry of wanting to help his girlfriend, but not wanting to get punched in the face.
Sure.
I clearly remember that. And I don't know, maybe he did have some physical, interaction that I didn't see, but the two of them link arms and they're walking up my lawn. So I still have a pistol, pointed in their direction, and I'm telling them, show me your hands. I want to see your hands. Don't make any sudden movements. I will render first aid, but you guys need to do what the heck I say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my neighbor's wife gets into their SUV and somehow or another gets it out of the ditch. And I didn't think anything but a tow truck could have gotten that SUV out of a ditch, but it's slamming in forward, slamming in reverse, and got it out of the ditch. And I realized that I inserted myself into a situation which changed everything. So whereas they're walking up my lawn, if I'm not there and they don't see me as a potentially safer place than the neighbors who are, um, like a hornet's nest right now, and it's a 3-on-2 scenario. Um, that they don't walk up my lawn. But what transpires or what proceeds to happen is my neighbor's wife gets the SUV out of the ditch and is going to run them over in my front lawn. Where at this point they're being compliant. They've gotten down on the ground. They're showing me their hands. I've decided that the fight is pretty much out of them. They just don't want to be hurt anymore. And so I have to point my gun from them to my neighbor's wife behind the driver's seat of this SUV and say, no, stop. Do not run them over.
Mm-hmm.
Back the truck up now. And I might not have said truck, but she she got the idea, and thankfully I didn't shoot at her either. So to this point, I haven't discharged my firearm at all. And I definitely have some PTSD because I, as far as never having pointed my weapon at a human being before this evening, and I had to point it, at least 3 different times,
Right.
with the possibility of having to pull the trigger. That was pretty heavy in the aftermath. But they, she backs the truck up, and I say, go to your porch and wait for police. And so my neighbors do that, and the two perps, if you will, or the perp and his girlfriend, I motion to them, okay, y'all sit on this concrete bench, which is kind of offset from my main front porch. And then I'm going to go get some bleed stop because she's bleeding profusely. I said, but you guys stay put. And I holster my weapon. I return, my wife's on the phone with 911, so she's got them on speakerphone, so they're aware at least that the guy with the American flag headband is trying to help,
Mm-hmm.
which was good. And I asked her for some bleed stop. My son knew right where it was, so he went and got it. And I put 2 packets of bleed stop because I couldn't tell if she had been shot or what exactly, but there was a lot of blood. And I know that head injuries bleed a lot, but I didn't
They
want her
do.
passing out on
Can
my
confirm,
porch.
yeah.
Yeah. And so we get the bleed stop on her, and the perp, the young man, is saying it was just a BB gun. It was just firecrackers. And I said, well, nobody here knew that. And if that's true, that's a horrible idea.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
you're, I said, I'm really glad that everyone is alive and seems to be okay at this point. And that's what God wanted tonight. Because there's no other reason that nobody was more seriously hurt. And so the police arrived. I surrendered my weapon. Now, one thing that I didn't do was I didn't announce that I had a weapon holstered at 1 o'clock. And so, in hindsight, I would have announced that right away. But the officer, asked me to put my hands up on the wall of my home, and she removed my weapon,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't a big deal or anything. They just didn't want anybody to have a loaded gun at that point.
Sure.
Um, and there was probably 20 squad cars that showed up when they did. And from rewatching the footage, it took about 20 minutes for the police to arrive after shots started ringing out. 18, 20 minutes, somewhere in there. So we were, kind of on our own until they arrived and tried to sort things out, which I was thankful for. And they did return my weapon, after, later that evening. And I waited about 7 hours on the curb to make a statement.
Right.
And at one point, one of the sergeants asked me if I was doing okay. And I was like, well, I'd like to go to the bathroom and get a drink of water. And he said, you going to come right back? I was like, yes, sir. He said, okay, knock yourself out. Because I guess he just didn't want me like disappearing from the scene before
Sure.
they could get a statement.
Yeah, I understand that. So a couple things I think are worth noting here, not the least of which is it's New Year's Eve. It couldn't have been a worse night for there to be a running gun battle that nobody is going to report because it sounds like fireworks. So at any
Right.
at any point during this whole thing, did it occur to you that no, the police probably haven't been called because anyone hearing this is assuming it's just more fireworks?
I believe that I either told my wife to call 911 when I brought my boys inside, or that she had already done so.
Okay.
So we had at least called after I sent, instructed my neighbors to go to their porch and wait for police because this needed to be over. And I believe they also called 911. And I can't stress enough that it helped that my wife, had a charged cell phone. But she told me later, initially, she had to find her charger because it was low on battery, and
Mm-hmm.
that was something that she would have done differently. Had a cell phone that was ready to go, and then she had 911 on speakerphone, so they were able to hear some of my interactions when I went and got ice, and when asked her for bleed stop at different times and put some gauze and whatever I could do because I have very limited first aid knowledge.
I think for me, the turning point on the charge level of my cell phone, where that changed and became important to me, was after watching a documentary about 9/11, and somebody stuck in an elevator shaft, and the only flashlight that anyone had was his little, Nokia flip
Hmm.
phone light or whatever that was on there. And
That was it.
now I have I literally, if my phone goes below 70%, I'm like, I need to find a charger immediately, or we're all gonna die. So that's
Yeah, that's true.
that's actually a really really good point. So your neighbors across the street, were there a lot of guests? Were there kids in that house when the guy shot at it?
Yeah, so they have a young son, and there was a nephew there. Um, the next night, the nephew set off some fireworks in the ditch, and I about rolled out of bed. Some M80s, and I texted my neighbor, and I was like, "Hey, could we put a
Yeah,
moratorium on fireworks
make
for like maybe a week?"
make that stop, please.
Yeah, and he was like, "Yeah, sorry, I got onto him about it." Um, but yeah, there was kids, and I mean, it was. literally the hand of God that no one was struck by any of those bullets. I
So
saw a spot on my brick where I could tell that a bullet had sheared,
okay.
and hit the brick on the garage.
So definitely confirm that
Um,
perp number one, the guy who showed up, the unknown gentleman,
mhm.
had a real loaded firearm and shot real bullets at their house. So I'm glad you were there to stop your neighbors from doing something they might regret, because had they not been in, mortal danger and run these people over and killed them, that might be considered some form of murder and or manslaughter,
Yeah.
even in Texas.
So, I mean, a vehicle is a deadly weapon.
Right, but I understand that level of rage. If someone has shot at your home with your children in it,
Yeah.
I don't condone vigilantism. I don't condone them murdering someone in cold blood. But I certainly can understand how angry that would make someone to have your
Hmm.
home shot at by some random dude who has such a fragile ego that
Hmm.
he has to resort to flashing a gun to get out of an argument. And then
Yeah.
from
It
what you told
was.
me
Yeah. It
later,
was.
with him not even attempting to help his girlfriend or wife or whoever it was, yeah, it
Yeah.
seems like a real gem, a real peach. This guy.
Yeah. And hopefully there's some lessons learned that will help, everyone on their way. I definitely could take some things away from it as well. I mean, since then I've started carrying pretty much 100% of the time, except for, when it's bedtime. Um, and, I put up a fence in our backyard, which we didn't have up to that point.
Hmm.
I check my cameras more often just to make sure that they're actually working. And my wife keeps her cell phone, charged more often.
Right.
Um, and the tunnel vision and the auditory shut off are something that I did not anticipate. I'd heard of, but it was literally a higher stress situation than I've ever been in, and I need to practice more in high stress situations, perhaps like airsoft or something.
Yeah, dude. Force
Um,
on force is absolutely the best way to go to kind of condition yourself to that level of stress. You're not going to get it like a real gunfight, but
mhm.
paintball or even, dude, even running around your house with your kids with Nerf guns is better than nothing. Just the idea that you're trying to avoid being hit by whatever projectile it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's just better than nothing as
Right.
far as raising that level of stress to help preparedness for when it actually happens. Because it took me the first minute of the incident to calm down enough to where I was confident that I could hit something if I needed to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it didn't take that long, but I was working on my breathing, and it was yeah, it was really a blessing that no one was more seriously hurt. I'll put it that way. But it's a reminder that trouble can find you anywhere, and it only takes two willing participants in order for trouble to really get out of hand, and then other people be at risk. Um, and that a kind word can really deflect a lot of that. Um, and even still, God's hand of grace was certainly on the whole situation. I'm thankful for that. And as I help the kids kind of process through it, I just remind them that we can count our blessings here. This could have been worse than it was, and we don't have to walk around in fear. But I think we're at least a little more aware, and it, uh, yeah, just paying attention to our surroundings even more so than we did before. Is something that we've all kind of taken away from this. And there've been a couple of times where the boys have come inside and said, "Hey, yeah, I noticed a vehicle that I didn't want to be outside anymore." So I was like, "Okay, no problem." And I'll take a glance out the window and see, because this world we live in is not safe. And whereas when I grew up in the '80s, it was totally okay to ride my bike, 3 blocks down the road to a friend's house. Uh, with the number of registered sex offenders that are in our area, it's not safe to do that anymore. And so,
Yeah, we used to get home
I
from
don't send my
school at 3 in the afternoon and go to the woods and disappear until it got dark, and nobody thought
yeah,
twice about it.
my mom would tell us, don't come back until dark.
Yeah,
you know, if she had had enough, y'all go outside and play. Don't come back till dark.
yeah. Come back when the lights come on. She used to say to me. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, but it was hopefully we got all our adventures out in one day for the whole year.
God willing. So what ended up happening
Yeah.
to To this knucklehead, was he arrested? Was he charged with anything, or has that been disposed yet? I know it wasn't that long ago this happened.
Um, yeah, he wasn't a well. He left in a squad car. He was the only one taken to jail, as far as I know. I don't know what happened to him after that. I did get a copy of the police report, but so far I don't know that any charges were filed. There could be offsetting circumstances, and I don't know if um, the DA would even proceed with any of it since there wasn't anyone seriously hurt. The young lady was released from the hospital later that night. Overheard the sergeant saying, "No, don't bring her here. Take her. Can you take her home?" like like he had to explain that to the escorting officer was
Right,
kind of funny.
right.
Like, don't. And he referred to the situation as a cluster. You
Yeah,
know what?
I'm
It's
very
like,
I'm
don't
very
bring her to.
familiar. Speaking of the
Yeah.
police, how do you feel about their response? Professional? I know you said your wife described you as the I believe you said the ruggedly handsome long haired man in the American flag bandana or something like that. So when they got there, how do you
Oh,
feel they handled it?
as well as can be expected. And I think that 99% of my interactions with the police were extremely positive, and it was a very chaotic situation. So I can um, give grace to a few of the interactions that weren't positive. At one point, an officer had told me to stay right there,
Hmm.
which I was sitting on the concrete bench, which had blood on it from the neighbor's, or not the neighbor, but the bad guy's girlfriend. And I kind of wanted to clean that up, but she told me to stay right there. And I didn't want to be sitting in blood either. Um, and so then another officer came up to me and said, "Hey, sir, can you move over to this spot?" And I
Oh,
was glad to
okay.
do it, but I said, "Hey, she told me I needed to stay right here." He said to me, "Look, she's got a badge, I got a badge. If she doesn't like it, she can take it up with me." I said, "Okay." So I moved over to this other chair, and she noticed me out of the corner of her eye, 50 yards away, and said, "Sir, I thought I told you to stay right
Oh
there."
man.
And the other officer was like, "Hey, chill. I told him to move. We've got to take photos of this area."
Right.
And then so then I got moved from that spot to another one out by the roadside, and that's where I sat for a good long while. And and it was a real chaotic scene. I mean, the detective told me he's worked murder incidents that were less complex than this,
Yeah, there's a lot of
that
moving
require.
parts. I mean, there's like three acts, to this. We were talking about both of us having a acting background. There was like three acts
Hmm.
to this play, and none of them were good, and all of them were running all over the place, shooting in every direction. So yeah, as a retired cop, I empathize with that detective and the evidence team and everybody else with having to show up at that scene. Gabriel,
Yeah.
before we let you go, is there anything else you wanted to discuss? I know you had written some notes down, so I don't want to miss anything.
I didn't know that there was counseling available and that there was victims of crimes
Mm-hmm.
resources
Sure.
until after this. I think it was helpful to take the kids to the safe harbor, is what they call it in the area, where the kids can talk about their experiences. And I purchased carry insurance after this incident, because had I discharged my firearm even once, even a warning shot, then the situation changes for me greatly.
Absolutely.
Um, and having never pointed my weapon at a human being, and I had to do so at least 3 times that evening, it was a very sobering thought after the fact of it could have gone south really quickly, and if I didn't have any kind of firearm insurance, then I'd kind of be up the creek without a paddle as far as representation and what have you. So I have purchased since firearm legal protection. Teamwork with your spouse. She was on with 911 and
Mm-hmm.
keeping the kids safe, and every day we pray, God, please keep us safe and those around us. And that was evident on that day, and that actual kindness, true kindness matters. Um, so yeah, that's about all I have. Thanks
Yeah,
for
I really like what you said about earlier about de-escalation. If it Maybe if your neighbor had just been like, "Hey, man, come on, there's kids out here," you know what I mean, or something to
Yeah.
that effect, or the old pushing the hands towards the floor. Hey, please slow down. It
Yeah.
could have prevented all this, but I don't know, man. Judging from what you told me about this guy, our perp, he sounds like a real peach. I don't know. I think he was just looking to probably brandish that gun at somebody, and you guys were the
Yeah.
lucky winners of that little round of life's lottery, as it were. Gabriel, man, I
When,
cannot thank
when,
you enough for reaching out to us. I can't thank you enough for
yeah.
being willing to come on the show and talk about your experience. And from what I'm reading in the reviews, people are getting a lot of good info out of these shows, and I think this is no exception whatsoever. And I really like your attitude that you're willing to go, yeah, I could have done this better, I could have done that better. We need more of that in the self defense community. We need more of that in the Second Amendment community. That not everybody has a perfect incident every time. I think you did a phenomenal job under the circumstances.
Mm.
And I remember the first time I pointed a gun at somebody as a law enforcement officer, and it's very surreal, a very surreal experience. So don't feel
Yeah.
bad that wasn't the dirty Harry moment that some people might have expected it to be. Well done, folks. Don't forget to stick around after the interview as I talk to Stephen Gutowski from thereload.com, and we'll get some good information, as always, out of him. Gabriel, again, my friend, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys for what you do.
All right, gang, it's that time of the week again. It's time for the Gutowski Files with our friend Stephen Gutowski. He is the founder of thereload.com and the host of the weekly Reload podcast, which is available on all your major podcast outlets and on YouTube. And I never asked you this, Stephen. Can people go to thereload.com and watch the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Every
Okay.
week we put up a post that has the YouTube video embedded and the link to where you can download it if you want.
Very cool. All right. Well, that's
Plus, members get it a day early too.
a day early, folks. You heard it here first. Stephen, thanks for being here. This week we are discussing recently the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has nominated a Supreme Court justice to fill the seat vacated or being vacated by Justice Breyer. Her name is Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think I'm pronouncing the first name right. I've never said that name out loud, so I hope I'm not messing it up. Ketanji Brown Jackson was nominated for that seat, and I looked her up, did a little bit of research. I'm not the reporter here, you are, but I did a little bit of research, and she was born a year before me in 1970. I was born in 71. So far there hasn't been a president younger than me, but I'm getting close to being the same age as somebody who's gone to the Supreme Court, and I'm starting to feel like an underachiever. With that said,
Well, just remember that one of the goals when nominating a Supreme Court justice is to make them as young as possible because they want them to serve as long as they possibly
okay,
can.
that makes me feel better. I appreciate that.
You're still old though, just for the record.
So let's talk about this individual. She doesn't have a lot of history on the record on Second Amendment stuff, which is obviously our wheelhouse. It's our concern. Do you know anything about her Second Amendment history or things that might indicate where she might land on that? And what do you think her chances are of being confirmed?
Yeah, so she's been on the DC circuit for a couple of years now. The Court of Appeals in DC that just handles cases specifically out of the Washington DC area,
which is a launch pad for the Supreme Court. It seems like there's been quite a few.
Kavanaugh, right?
Yeah,
Kavanaugh was from DC circuit as well, in the most recent memory. But yeah, because the DC circuit is technically Washington DC is part of the federal government. It's run by the federal government. So yeah, you get it's an important circuit for sure. But she hasn't done any gun cases there. So there's no ruling that you can look at and read through her reasoning and get a clear grasp of what she is going to bring to the table in terms of Second Amendment cases once she's on the court, if she does get confirmed. But there are some things you can look at. There's a couple things. One is the reaction of the gun rights and gun control groups, which just to sum it up fairly short here, the gun control groups all support her nomination, mainly because Joe Biden is the one who nominated her, and he has a record they like on gun control. And then the gun rights groups oppose her nomination, basically for the exact same reason, because Joe Biden nominated her and they don't like his record on gun control. So, pretty straightforward there, at least, I suppose. However, you can also look at what she said in the past, because she had to go through a confirmation hearing to get on the DC circuit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And during that, she was asked in written questions, not during her oral hearing, but during written questions about a couple different questions on guns. And I think the most relevant thing she said was Dick Durbin, who's a Democrat from Illinois, who's on the Judiciary Committee, asked how she would ensure Americans could feel confident that she'd protect the Second Amendment. And basically, she promised to uphold previous rulings by the Supreme Court. She said, quote, as a sitting federal judge, I'm bound to apply faithfully all binding precedents of the DC Circuit and Supreme Court, including all precedents that pertain to the Second Amendment individual right to keep and bear arms. If I were to be confirmed to the DC Circuit, that obligation would not change. And so there's two interesting things in this quote. One is that she specifically says that there's an individual right to keep and bear arms guaranteed in the Second Amendment.
Okay.
Which is an important point. That's what Heller was about, the landmark Supreme Court case from 2008. But also, she's talking about abiding by precedents here. And that's where it gets less clear, right? Because she's saying she would abide by precedents, which is what judges are supposed to do. She's not necessarily saying, I believe this, as, I don't. When you get to the Supreme Court, you no longer are necessarily having to abide by Supreme Court precedent, as like you have more obviously flexibility to set Supreme Court precedent or change it when you're on the court. And so when you're making these sorts of statements, like obviously on the surface level, that sounds like, oh, she's gonna be a pro-gun justice, right? But that's not necessarily true, because of the way these things work in federal courts and the way that like confirmation question answers work. I think Sotomayor said the same basic thing during her confirmation, and she obviously, I don't think anyone would judge her as a pro-gun jurist on the Supreme Court, and so that's the concern that you would have for her.
So the late great Antonin Scalia, Supreme Court Justice, was a big fan of stare decisis, so which is a legal concept that just means, look, if it's precedent, it's precedent. We'll decide future cases based on precedent. If you ever listen to like Ben Shapiro, who's a Harvard-educated lawyer, aside from being a multimedia person and opinion guy, he makes a good point, which is that stare decisis is really not the best way to do things, because if you go back to 1830, and you're basing all your cases off precedent, we wouldn't made a lot of progress that we've made by now. So, I think that I like the fact that she doesn't. There's not a lot of rhetoric one way or the other in her past that we can point to. But I think the fact that she was a public defender is definitely going to play into. I think it's going to play into how she views gun laws writ large. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good point. Honestly, there's a couple reasons that you might have to be hopeful if you're a gun rights advocate looking at her nomination. I mean, I at a certain level, Joe Biden nominated her, and that probably might be the best indicator as to how she may rule on guns at the Supreme Court, just to be totally fair. But it's not impossible that a judge on the court differs from the president who nominated them. That happens, fairly regularly.
Yeah.
And so you could see that happen here too. And one of the reasons you might think it's possible is because she was a public defender, and public defenders tend to have a more nuanced view of government power, because they're the ones who've gone through and seen probably some of the abuses of the system oftentimes, because they're dealing with people who can't afford to pay for lawyers, and who are more likely to be rolled up in the system in ways that their public defenders don't agree with. And and you've seen a lot of public defenders come out in recent years against strict gun laws. You've got a group of public defenders filing a brief against New York's restrictive gun carry law at the Supreme Court. You had a group of Michigan-based public defenders decry the enforcement of gun carry laws in Detroit, saying that 97% of arrests made for people carrying without a permit when they hadn't committed any other crime beyond that were black.
Mm-hmm.
And so, perhaps she's obviously also an African American woman, so she might have more issue with the unequitable enforcement of gun laws that still exists in this country, is in terms of minorities being prosecuted at a higher rate for possession crimes and things of that nature. Plus, she also had filed an amicus brief, or sorry, I actually believe it was an amicus brief on behalf of a libertarian think tank called the Cato Institute at one point. Now, this was not a gun case either, so it doesn't necessarily provide insight into what she thinks on gun law, but it indicates she might have some more libertarian leanings.
And that's if that's the case, that's a potentially very good sign. And yeah, I mean, if you look over the past, in my lifetime, since Sandra Day O'Connor, the various and sundry SCOTUS appointees, many times they will surprise you on this or that issue as to where they come down, and especially if it's something a hot button issue like abortion or gun rights or whatever, you just never know. And they are independent. They are an independent branch of government, and they're independent actors, and they can decide however they want to decide. So, time will tell. By the time this episode comes out, we may know a little bit more about Miss Jackson. But like I said, time will tell, and I hope that she does take that libertarian view of the Second Amendment, obviously.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. Obviously, best thing you can do with the judge when you're trying to figure out what they're going to do is look at their record. And in this case, she just doesn't have a long record opining on guns or writing or dealing with guns in courts. So at least not that we're aware of yet. I'm still looking through her record, so we'll find out if she has something more that we can bring to everyone's attention down the line here. But for now, we don't have a ton to go off, and that's where speculation comes in.
You know what else comes in? TheReload.com, because if you're a member, you're going to get these stories before everybody else. You're going to get the podcast a day before everybody else. And, if you're at TheReload.com, you're going to get information. You're going to get stories and angles on stories you're not going to see anywhere else because Stephen and his team are out there doing the work to bring you the information. So go to TheReload.com. Consider getting a membership. Throw this poor man a couple of bucks. He's got employees, he's got mouths to feed, he's got overhead, and he does not have sponsors. So he only relies on the membership. That way he can stay independent and he can tell you the truth about absolutely any topic. Stephen, thank you so much for being on, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely.
Hey friends, this is John Correa. If you like the podcast, if it is bringing you value, do me a favor. Just rate the podcast and leave us a rating and a review. It really helps us out.